I'm Autumn Hayes, 29 years old, and I just destroyed my entire family's facade of perfection with a single email. 3 hours ago, I was sitting at my own birthday dinner, watching my parents fawn over my sister's new promotion, while my birthday cake sat untouched. Madison is the only one worth celebrating tonight, my father announced, raising his glass. I've spent my whole life in Madison's shadow, but tonight something inside me finally snapped. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Family dynamics can be brutal, but sometimes karma has a way of revealing the truth. Let's dive into how everything fell apart. Growing up in Burlington, Vermont, I always felt like an afterthought in the Hayes household. My sister Madison was 2 years older, and from the moment she took her first steps, she became the sun around which our family orbited. Madison was the gifted one, straight A's class president, tennis champion. My parents attended every one of her matches, every award ceremony, their faces beaming with pride as they applauded from the front row. I wasn't unsuccessful by any reasonable standard. I maintained a solid B+ average, played violin in the school orchestra, and eventually earned a scholarship to a good state university. But in the Hayes family, good was never good enough, when exceptional existed in the form of my sister. My birthdays were particularly painful markers of this disparity. When Madison turned 16, my parents threw her a lavish party with a hired DJ and catering. They even leased her a brand new car with a giant red bow. My sweet 16, just 2 years later, consisted of a store-bought cake and a gift card to a local bookstore. "We're a little tight on money this year," my mother explained, though they had just returned from a 2-week European vacation with Madison to celebrate her college acceptance. As we grew into adulthood, the pattern only intensified. Madison went to an Ivy League school and then law school, while I pursued a degree in graphic design. Every family gathering inevitably turned into a showcase of Madison's latest achievements. Madison just made junior partner, Madison just bought a condo, Madison is dating a doctor. Meanwhile, my stable job at a respected marketing agency and my comfortable apartment were barely acknowledged. I tried everything to win their approval. I worked overtime to secure promotions. I dated men I thought they would approve of. I even moved back to Burlington after college to be closer to them, hoping proximity might somehow make them see me. Nothing worked. My relationship with Madison was complicated. On the surface, we maintained a cordial sisterly bond. We texted occasionally and met for coffee when she was in town. But beneath the pleasantries, resentment festered, at least on my part. Madison seemed genuinely oblivious to the disparity in our parents' affections. She would often say things like, "Mom and Dad are so proud of both of us," which made me wonder if she was living in an alternate reality or simply being cruel. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Bennett, who helped me recognize the toxic family dynamics at play. "What you're describing sounds like the golden child, scapegoat dynamic," she explained during one particularly tearful session. "It's a common pattern in dysfunctional families." "But they're not abusive," I protested. "They've never hit me or anything like that." "Emotional neglect is a form of abuse, Autumn," she replied gently. "And it can be just as damaging as physical abuse." Those words hit me like a thunderbolt. For years I had blamed myself for my parents' indifference. I thought if I just achieved more, became more like Madison, they would love me equally. Dr. Bennett helped me see that their behavior was about them, not me. With therapy, I began building a life outside my family's shadow. I made friends who valued me for exactly who I was. I excelled at my job, not to impress my parents, but because I genuinely loved design. I even started dating Eric, a kind-hearted elementary school teacher who looked at me like I was the center of his universe. But family patterns run deep. Despite my progress, a part of me still craved my parents' approval. I still showed up for family dinners, still hoped each time would be different. I maintained a carefully curated version of myself around them. Never too loud, never too emotional, never rocking the boat. As my 29th birthday approached, Eric encouraged me to invite my family to celebrate. "It's important to you," he said, "and I want to meet them." I was hesitant but agreed. Maybe, just maybe, with Eric by my side, the evening would be different. I reserved a table at Harvest Burlington's nicest farm-to-table restaurant. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a forest green dress that matched my eyes, and styling my chestnut hair in loose waves. Eric arrived first, bringing me a bouquet of wildflowers and a small wrapped package. Later, he whispered, kissing my cheek and tucking the gift into his jacket pocket. When my parents and Madison arrived, they were 20 minutes late and full of apologies about traffic, despite living just 15 minutes away. The evening started pleasantly enough, with casual conversation about the unusually warm spring weather and the restaurant's award-winning chef. Then Madison cleared her throat. "I actually have some news," she announced, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for her water glass. "I've been made senior partner at the firm." And just like that, my birthday dinner became Madison's celebration. The evening that should have been my celebration quickly spiraled into the Madison show. My parents peppered her with questions about her promotion, completely forgetting why we were gathered in the first place. "This calls for champagne," my father declared, signaling the waiter without so much as a glance in my direction. Eric squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes conveying silent support. He had heard all my stories about growing up in Madison's shadow, but I could tell he was shocked to see it playing out so blatantly. "Actually," I said, my voice barely audible above my father's enthusiastic questioning about Madison's new salary, "I have some news too." 4 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of interest. My mother's gaze held polite curiosity, my father's impatience, Madison's benign indifference, and Eric's warm encouragement. "I've been promoted to creative director," I announced, trying to infuse my voice with the enthusiasm I'd felt when I'd first received the news 2 days ago. "It's the youngest the agency has ever had." "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said with a quick smile before turning back to Madison. "Now will you have your own office with this promotion?" Eric's grip on my hand tightened. I could feel his tension, his desire to defend me. I subtly shook my head. This was nothing new. The waiter arrived with the champagne my father had ordered, and he raised his glass. "To Madison, the only one worth celebrating tonight," he declared, beaming at my sister. The words hung in the air like a slap. Even Madison looked uncomfortable, glancing at me with what might have been apology in her eyes. Eric's face flushed with anger. And something inside me, something that had been bending and stretching for 29 years, finally snapped. "Excuse me," I said, pushing back my chair. "I need some air." I walked out of the restaurant on shaky legs, gulping the cool evening air. Eric followed moments later, wrapping his arms around me as tears spilled down my cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Autumn," he whispered into my hair. "What they're doing is not okay." "It's always been like this," I said, wiping my tears. "I don't know why I keep expecting anything different." "Because you deserve better," he replied firmly. "Everyone deserves to be celebrated by their family, especially on their birthday." We stood there for several minutes, until my breathing steadied. When we returned to the table, dessert had arrived, a chocolate mousse for each person but no birthday cake. My parents hadn't even remembered to order one. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of small talk and uncomfortable silences. When the check came, my father paid without discussion, as if it were any regular dinner and not my birthday celebration. Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to part ways, my mother hugged me perfunctorily. "Happy birthday, dear," she said, as if suddenly remembering the purpose of the evening. "We'll have to do something special for your 30th next year." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As they walked toward their car, I overheard my father speaking to Madison. "We should stop by that new bakery tomorrow to celebrate properly. Just the 3 of us." Something cold and hard crystallized in my chest at that moment. I had spent nearly 3 decades trying to earn a place in my own family, and nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. Later that night, as Eric and I sat on my couch with a bottle of wine and the cupcakes he had thoughtfully purchased, he finally gave me the small package he'd been carrying. Inside was a delicate silver locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny folded note that simply read, "You are enough. You have always been enough." I burst into tears again, but these were different, cleansing somehow. "I've been thinking," Eric said hesitantly, "about what you told me regarding your grandmother's letters. My grandmother, my father's mother, had passed away 5 years ago. She had always been kind to me, seeming to make a special effort to connect when she visited. After her death, my father had distributed her belongings, giving Madison her valuable jewelry and art collection, while I received a box of old letters and photographs." "What about them?" I asked, curious about the sudden change of subject. "Have you ever read them all?" Eric asked. "You mentioned there were dozens." I shook my head. "I looked through a few, but they're mostly from the 1960 seconds and 70 seconds when she was young. Personal stuff, you know." "Maybe you should," Eric suggested. "Sometimes the past holds answers to the present." The next day, still raw from the birthday disaster, I called in sick to work and pulled out the box of my grandmother's letters from the back of my closet. I started reading chronologically, beginning with her teenage correspondence with friends. Hours passed as I worked my way through decades of my grandmother's life, documented in faded ink and yellowing paper. By late afternoon, I had reached the letters from the mid-1980 seconds, around the time my parents were married. And then I found it. A letter that would change everything. Dated March 1994, just a few months before I was born, it was addressed to my grandmother from someone named Caroline Bishop. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Eleanor, I understand your concern, but I've made my decision. I cannot keep this baby. I'm only 19, still in college, with dreams I'm not ready to sacrifice. Your son and Diana have been trying for years without success, and Madison needs a sibling. This seems like the perfect solution for everyone. The adoption papers are ready. The baby will be raised as their own with all the advantages I could never provide. I only ask that you keep our agreement, that someday when she's old enough she'll know the truth about where she came from. With gratitude, Caroline." The letter slipped from my fingers as the room seemed to spin around me. I was adopted. I wasn't my parents' biological child. Madison wasn't my biological sister. The golden child, scapegoat dynamic, suddenly made horrific sense. I had never truly been part of the family at all. With frantic energy, I dug deeper into the box, finding more letters from Caroline to my grandmother, updates on her life, questions about mine, all indicating a secret pact between them to keep tabs on me from afar. My grandmother had been the only link between me and my birth mother, and now they were both gone. As the shock began to fade, anger took its place, white-hot and all-consuming. My parents had not only favored Madison but had actively deceived me my entire life. Every "you don't look like anyone in the family" comment, every medical form where they'd vaguely listed family history unknown for my side. It had all been lies by omission. I called Eric, barely able to speak through my tears, and he rushed over immediately. Together we read through more letters, confirming beyond doubt that my suspicions were correct. "What are you going to do?" Eric asked, gently, after I had cried myself into exhaustion. I looked at the scattered letters, at the life that had been hidden from me, and felt a cold resolve settle in my bones. "I'm going to confront them," I said. "All of them. And then I'm going to find Caroline Bishop." I spent the next week in a daze, going through the motions at work while my mind constantly returned to the letters. The revelation of my adoption explained so much about my childhood, why I had always felt like an outsider, why my parents had always treated Madison differently. It wasn't just favoritism. It was the fundamental difference between raising your biological child and one you had reluctantly agreed to adopt. Eric urged caution. Maybe you should process this more before confronting them, he suggested one evening, as we sorted through more of the letters looking for additional information about Caroline Bishop. I've been processing being the family disappointment for 29 years, I replied, anger simmering just beneath the surface. I don't need more time to think about it. Still, I recognize the wisdom in his advice. This wasn't something to rush into without preparation. I needed a plan and I needed more information. From my grandmother's correspondence, I learned that Caroline Bishop had been a promising art student at the University of Vermont when she became pregnant. The father wasn't mentioned, but there were hints that he had been significantly older and possibly married. Caroline had initially considered keeping the baby, but ultimately decided her education and career aspirations took precedence. My grandmother, who had apparently maintained a relationship with Caroline even after the adoption, mentioned in later letters that Caroline had graduated and moved to New York to pursue a career in gallery management. The last letter was from 2015, shortly before my grandmother's death, with Caroline mentioning a recent move to Boston to run her own gallery. Armed with this information, I did what any millennial would do. I Googled her. There were several Caroline Bishops in the Boston area, but one immediately caught my attention. The owner of Bishop Contemporary, a successful gallery in the Back Bay area, specializing in emerging artists. The gallery's website featured a brief biography and a professional photograph of a woman in her mid-40s, with auburn hair and green eyes. My eyes. The resemblance was undeniable, sending a shock of recognition through me. This was her. This was my biological mother. The discovery steeled my resolve. It was time for the truth to come out, all of it. I spent another day planning my approach, then sent a group text to my parents and Madison requesting a family dinner at their house that weekend. It's important, I wrote. I need all of you there. My mother responded immediately with concern, asking if everything was all right. My father suggested postponing until after Madison's firm's annual gala. Madison herself simply replied, sure, as if my request barely registered on her list of priorities. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept. Eric stayed over holding me as I alternated between anxiety and anger. Remember, no matter what happens tomorrow, you have people who love you for exactly who you are, he whispered as dawn broke. I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home in the affluent part of Burlington, clutching a folder containing copies of the most damning letters. My hands trembled slightly as I rang the doorbell, but my resolve was firm. Madison answered, looking casually perfect in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. You look terrible, she observed, eyeing the dark circles under my eyes. Are you sick? We need to talk, I replied, brushing past her into the familiar living room where I had spent so many years feeling inadequate. My parents were already seated, my father with his customary glass of scotch, my mother perched anxiously on the edge of the sofa. They exchanged glances as I entered. A silent communication that I had witnessed countless times throughout my childhood but never been privy to. Autumn, what's this about? My father asked, his tone already holding a note of impatience. Your mother's got bridge club in 2 hours. I remained standing, needing the psychological advantage of height for what was to come. I know, I said simply. I know everything. Confusion flickered across their faces. Madison looked completely baffled, but something shifted in my mother's expression. A fleeting panic quickly masked. What are you talking about, honey? My mother asked, her voice artificially light. I pulled out the letters, placing them carefully on the coffee table. I found Grandma's letters. The ones from Caroline Bishop. The effect was immediate and dramatic. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Madison's expression transformed from confusion to shock. You had no right to go through those, my father finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had every right, I countered, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. They were given to me, and apparently they're the only honest thing anyone in this family has ever given me. Autumn, please sit down, my mother pleaded. We can explain. Explain what? That I'm adopted, that you've lied to me my entire life, that the reason I've always been treated like an outsider in this family is because I literally am one. Madison stood suddenly. What is she talking about? She demanded, looking at our parents. Autumn's adopted. The shock on her face appeared genuine, sending another wave of betrayal through me. They hadn't even told Madison. We were going to tell you, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. When the time was right. I'm 29 years old, I replied, anger finally breaking through my carefully controlled facade. Exactly when would the time have been right? After another decade of making me feel like I wasn't good enough, my father stood abruptly, moving to the liquor cabinet to refill his scotch with shaking hands. It was complicated, he said, his back to me. We never intended for things to turn out this way, really, because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty simple. You got the daughter you wanted in Madison, and I was just, what? The backup, the charity case, the favor to grandma and some college girl who didn't want to be a mother. Madison sank back onto the couch, visibly processing this revelation. I didn't know, she said softly, looking at me with new eyes. Autumn, I swear I had no idea. For some reason, her ignorance made it worse. The golden child hadn't even been aware of the fundamental rift in our family. My mother rose, approaching me with outstretched hands. I stepped back, unwilling to accept her touch. We loved you from the moment we got you, she insisted, tears now streaming down her face. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? I challenged. Because I have 29 years of evidence that says otherwise. Every missed recital, every forgotten birthday, every time you chose Madison over me, it all says differently. My father turned back to face me, his expression hardening. That's not fair. We gave you everything. A good home, education, opportunities. You gave me the bare minimum. I cut him off. And you made sure I knew that even that was more than I deserved. The room fell silent, the weight of decades of unspoken resentment hanging in the air between us. Does she know about me? I finally asked, my voice cracking slightly. Caroline. Does she ever ask about me? My parents exchanged another look. Guilty this time. Your grandmother kept in touch with her, my mother admitted reluctantly. After Eleanor died, Caroline contacted us directly, but your father thought it best to discourage further communication. White-hot rage surged through me at this new betrayal. You had no right, I whispered, no right to make that decision for me. We were protecting you, my father insisted. No, I replied, gathering my composure. You were protecting yourselves. Your perfect family narrative. Your precious Madison. Madison flinched at this, but I couldn't bring myself to care about her feelings. For once, this wasn't about her. I've found her, I continued, watching their faces carefully. Caroline, I know where she is and I'm going to meet her. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Autumn, please, my mother begged. Let's talk about this rationally. There are things you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that my entire life has been built on lies. I understand that I have never been, and will never be, a real part of this family. I gathered the letters, returning them to my folder. I'm not here for your permission, or your blessing. I'm here because you deserve to know that your secret is out. And now that it is, I don't see any reason to continue pretending we're a family. As I turned to leave, Madison suddenly stood. Wait, she said, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. What are you saying? You're just done with all of us. I paused at the door, looking back at the three people who had shaped my entire existence. For better and for worse. I'm saying I'm done living in the shadow of a family that never wanted me in the first place, I replied. I'm saying I deserve better than what any of you have ever given me. I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me on 29 years of lies. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of tears and rage. My phone buzzed incessantly, first with texts from my mother pleading for me to come back, then from Madison asking to meet privately, and finally a single terse message from my father, "You're making a mistake." I turned my phone off and drove in silence, the weight of what I'd just done settling over me. I had effectively cut ties with my entire family. While part of me felt liberated, another part was terrified. For all their flaws, they were the only family I had ever known. When I finally reached home, Eric was waiting. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. "It's done," I said, simply collapsing into his arms. That night, between bouts of emotional exhaustion and frantic planning, I drafted an email to Caroline Bishop. Finding her professional contact information had been easy enough through her gallery website. I stared at the blank composition box for nearly an hour, unsure how to begin a message to the woman who had given birth to me and then handed me over to people who never fully wanted me. Eventually, I settled on directness. "Dear Miss Bishop, my name is Autumn Hayes. I recently discovered through family correspondence that you are my biological mother. I was born in June 1995 and adopted by Richard and Diana Hayes of Burlington, Vermont. If you are indeed this Caroline Bishop, I would appreciate an opportunity to meet. If not, I apologize for the intrusion. Sincerely, Autumn Hayes." I hesitated for a long moment before pressing send, aware that this message could change the course of my life yet again. Once it was gone, I fell into a restless sleep on the couch, too emotionally drained to even make it to bed. The following morning, I woke to the sound of persistent knocking. Disoriented and groggy, I stumbled to the door to find Madison standing in the hallway looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door slowly, buying time to gather my thoughts. "There's nothing left to say, Madison." "There's everything left to say," she countered, turning to face me with red-rimmed eyes. "You dropped a bomb, and then just walked away." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone not consider your feelings? How unusual that must be for you." Madison flinched but held her ground. "I didn't know, Autumn, about any of it. I swear to you." "And that's supposed to make it better?" I asked, moving to the kitchen to start coffee, needing the routine to steady myself. "The fact that they didn't even trust their precious golden child with the family secret." "Stop calling me that," Madison said quietly. "I never asked to be put on a pedestal." "No, you just accepted every advantage, every praise, every opportunity they threw at you while I was left with the scraps," I replied, my hands shaking as I measured coffee grounds. "That's not fair," she protested. "How was I supposed to know?" I thought they were just harder on you because they expected more from you." I turned to face her, incredulous. "In what universe does that make sense? They expected more from me, so they celebrated me less, supported me less, loved me less." Madison sank onto a kitchen stool, suddenly looking smaller than I had ever seen her. "I know it doesn't make sense. But that's what I told myself, because the alternative was too awful to consider." "What alternative?" I demanded. "That they were just terrible parents to you," she admitted softly. "That they played favorites in a way that was cruel and damaging." The coffee maker gurgled in the silence that followed her confession. I leaned against the counter studying my sister, or the woman who had been my sister for 29 years, biology notwithstanding. "Why are you here, Madison? What do you want from me?" She looked up, her expression unguarded in a way I had rarely seen. "I want to fix this. I want to understand how we got here. I want my sister back." "I was never really your sister," I reminded her, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "That's not true," she insisted. "DNA doesn't make a family, Autumn. We grew up together. We shared a bathroom for 16 years. You know all my embarrassing teenage stories and I know yours. That's what makes us sisters." I poured 2 mugs of coffee, sliding one across to her out of habit. If that's true, then why did they treat us so differently? Madison wrapped her hands around the mug, staring into its depths as if it might hold answers. I don't know. I've been up all night, trying to make sense of it. I do, I said, taking a seat across from her. They never wanted me. I was a obligation, a favor to Grandma and your biological mother's friend. Our mother, Madison corrected gently. Whatever their failings, they raised both of us. And Diana Hayes is the only mother I've ever known. I shook my head, unwilling to concede this point. A real mother doesn't play favorites to this extent, Madison. A real mother makes all her children feel valued. Madison didn't argue, which was something of a first. Instead, she asked, "What will you do now? Are you really going to meet this Caroline person?" I confirmed, checking my phone. No response yet to my email. I need answers, she's the only one who can provide. And then what? Madison pressed. You'll just replace us with her, create a whole new family narrative where you're the cherished daughter. Her words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been fantasizing about? That Caroline would welcome me with open arms, that we would forge an instant mother-daughter bond, that would heal all the wounds my adoptive family had inflicted. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. I only know I can't go back to pretending everything is fine with them. Madison nodded slowly. I understand that. But what about us, Autumn, you and me, are we done too? The question hung in the air between us. Despite everything, Madison was the constant of my childhood. The sister I had simultaneously loved, envied, and resented. Could I really cut her out of my life completely? Before I could answer, my phone chimed with an email notification. Both of us froze, staring at it. Is that? Madison began. I don't know, I replied, my heart suddenly racing. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and opened my email. It was from Caroline Bishop. Dear Autumn, your email was unexpected but not unwelcome. Yes, I am indeed the Caroline Bishop you're looking for. I've thought of you often over the years and have received updates through your grandmother until her passing. I would very much like to meet. I'm actually going to be in Burlington next weekend for an art acquisition. Would Saturday at 1 p.m. work? There's a cafe called Muddy Waters that I remember fondly from my college days. Looking forward to your reply, Caroline. I read the email twice, then wordlessly handed the phone to Madison. She skimmed it quickly, her expression unreadable. She sounds nice, Madison finally offered, handing the phone back. She's been getting updates about me, I said, fixating on that detail. All these years, she's been keeping tabs on me through Grandma. Are you going to meet her? Madison asked. Of course I am, I replied without hesitation. Madison nodded, accepting this as inevitable. Do you want? Would you like me to go with you? Not to the actual meeting, she added quickly when I looked alarmed, but just for moral support beforehand. The offer surprised me. Throughout our lives, Madison had rarely put my needs before her own. This gesture, small as it was, felt significant. I don't know, I answered honestly. I need time to process all of this. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my identity, it's all been turned upside down in the span of a week. I get that, Madison said, rising to leave. But Autumn, whatever you discover about your biological family, whatever relationship you build with Caroline, it doesn't erase our history together. For better or worse, we're still sisters. At least in the ways that matter most. As she headed for the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just about the adoption secret, but for never noticing how differently they treated you. I should have seen it. I should have said something. The apology was unexpected, and I realized with some surprise deeply needed. Thank you, I said softly. After Madison left, I replied to Caroline's email confirming our meeting for the following Saturday. As I pressed send, I felt a strange mix of terror and anticipation. In just over a week, I would meet the woman who had given birth to me. The days leading up to the meeting crawled by with excruciating slowness. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction of tight deadlines and client revisions. Eric checked in daily, offering a steady presence without pushing. My parents called repeatedly, but I let their calls go to voicemail, not yet ready to hear their explanations or excuses. Madison surprisingly respected my request for space, sending only a single text: "I'm here when you're ready to talk." The night before my meeting with Caroline, I finally listened to my parents' voicemails. My mother's messages were tearful pleas to reconsider to come home so they could explain. My father's were more reserved but similarly focused on clearing up misunderstandings and moving forward as a family. None of them acknowledged the fundamental breach of trust or the years of differential treatment. None addressed the heart of why I felt betrayed. That night, I dreamed of a woman with my eyes and hair embracing me, like I was the most precious thing in her world. I woke with tears on my cheeks and a hollow ache in my chest. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, the type of perfect autumn day that had always been my favorite in Vermont. I dressed carefully in an emerald green sweater that Eric once said brought out my eyes. My mother's eyes, I now realized. "You've got this," Eric assured me before I left, kissing me gently. "Just be open to whatever happens. No expectations." Easier said than done, I thought, as I navigated downtown Burlington to the cafe where my biological mother waited. As I walked through the door of Muddy Waters, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it, I scanned the space for a woman who looked like an older version of myself. And there she was, sitting by the window, auburn hair streaked with elegant silver, those familiar green eyes scanning the room anxiously. Our gazes connected across the crowded cafe, and something profound and wordless passed between us. Recognition certainly, but something deeper as well. A shared history written in our DNA, if not in our memories. I took a deep breath and walked toward the table where the first chapter of my true story waited to be told. The woman who gave birth to me stood as I approached, her expression a complex mixture of anxiety and wonder. Up close, the resemblance between us was even more striking. Not just the green eyes and auburn hair, but the shape of our jawlines, the slight upturn of our noses. "Autumn," she said softly, my name sounding different somehow in her voice. "Thank you for coming." "Caroline," I replied, unsure of what else to say. What does one call their biological mother upon first meeting? Not mom, certainly. That title complicated, as it was belonged to the woman who had raised me, however imperfectly. We sat across from each other, both seemingly afraid to break the fragile moment with words. A waitress approached, and we both ordered coffee, grateful for the momentary distraction. "I'm not sure where to begin," Caroline finally said, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her mug when it arrived. "The beginning might be good," I suggested. "Why did you give me up?" The bluntness of my question seemed to catch her off guard, but she recovered quickly. "Direct and straightforward," she observed with a small smile. "I should have expected that. Is that a family trait?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Caroline nodded, taking a deep breath. "From my side, yes. My father, your grandfather, was the same way. He always said life's too short for beating around the bush." The mention of a grandfather I'd never known, would never know, sent an unexpected pang through my chest. An entire family tree I'd been disconnected from. "I was 19 when I got pregnant with you," Caroline began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I was a scholarship student at UVM studying art history, first in my family to go to college. The father was my art professor, married 15 years older." She shook her head. "Cliché, I know, but I thought I was in love." "What happened?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "When I told him about the pregnancy, he panicked. Offered money for an abortion, then disappeared when I refused." Her fingers twisted together on the table. "I considered keeping you, I really did. But I was barely supporting myself, estranged from my religious parents, who would have seen the pregnancy as confirmation of my sinful ways, and terrified of giving up the future I'd worked so hard for." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The story was painfully human, lacking the dramatic villainy or selfless nobility I had imagined in various scenarios. Your grandmother, Eleanor, was volunteering at the campus women's center where I went for counseling, Caroline continued. She mentioned her son and daughter-in-law had been trying for a sibling for their daughter without success. It seemed like providence. So, you just handed me over, I asked, the hurt I'd been carrying bubbling to the surface. Caroline's eyes glistened with tears. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, Autumn. The day they took you from the hospital. I've never felt pain like that before or since. Then why didn't you ever contact me directly? Why wait for me to find you? That wasn't the agreement, she said softly. Eleanor promised to keep me updated, to give me photographs, to tell me how you were doing. But Richard and Diana were clear. They wanted a clean break, a fresh start. They would raise you as their own with no interference from me. But after Grandma died, I tried. Caroline interrupted, her voice cracking. When Eleanor passed, I reached out to your parents. I sent letters, emails, even called once. Richard was not receptive. He said you were thriving, that introducing me into your life would only cause confusion and pain. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father had actively prevented Caroline from connecting with me, continuing the pattern of controlling my narrative without my consent. I should have tried harder, Caroline admitted, wiping away a tear. I should have fought to meet you, to explain. But I was afraid of causing upheaval in your life, of being rejected by you. It was easier to respect Richard's wishes and comfort myself with Eleanor's assurances that you were happy and loved. I wasn't, I said flatly, the truth of it sitting heavy between us. Not the way Madison was, not equally. Caroline's expression shifted to one of confusion. What do you mean? I spent the next 20 minutes detailing my childhood in Madison's shadow. The missed recitals, the forgotten birthdays, the constant comparative criticism. As I spoke, Caroline's face transformed from confusion to horror to anger. That was never what I wanted for you, she whispered when I finished. Eleanor told me you were cherished, that Richard and Diana considered you as much their daughter as Madison. If I had known, she trailed off, the implications hanging in the air between us. Would you have taken me back? I asked the question, surprising even me as it left my lips. Caroline met my gaze directly, in a heartbeat. The simple conviction in her voice unleashed something in me, a torrent of tears I couldn't control. Caroline moved to my side of the table, wrapping her arms around me as I sobbed against her shoulder. She smelled of oil paints and vanilla, an unfamiliar combination that somehow felt like home. When I finally regained my composure, Caroline returned to her seat, but kept one of my hands in hers. I know I can't replace the childhood you should have had, Autumn. I can't erase the hurt they caused you, but if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your life now. I think I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Over the next 2 hours, we began filling in the blanks of each other's lives. I learned that Caroline had never married or had other children. No one quite measured up after you, she admitted. She had built her career in the art world, eventually opening her own gallery in Boston that now represented several prominent contemporary artists. I told her about my work in graphic design, my relationship with Eric, my dreams of eventually starting my own studio. It felt surreal, and yet completely natural, this getting to know you conversation with the woman who had given me life. As our time together drew to a close, Caroline hesitated before pulling something from her bag. I brought something for you. I wasn't sure if I should, but... She handed me a small worn leather journal. I kept this when I was pregnant with you. All my thoughts, hopes, fears, it's all there. I want you to have it. I accepted the journal with trembling hands, recognizing it for the precious gift it was, a window into the beginning of my story. There's something else, Caroline said, her voice tentative. Your medical history. I've kept detailed records of my family's health issues, heart disease on my father's side, some autoimmune concerns on my mother's. Information you should have. Another piece of myself restored. As we prepared to part ways, Caroline looked at me intently. I'd like to see you again, Autumn, if you want. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance to know each other. I'd like that, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. Very much. We exchanged contact information and made tentative plans to meet again the following month, when she would be back in Vermont for a gallery showing. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd carried my entire life had been partially lifted. Caroline couldn't erase the pain of my childhood, but she had filled a hole in my identity I hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to heal. When I arrived home, Eric was waiting, his face anxious. "How did it go?" he asked as soon as I walked through the door. "Good," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "Really good, actually." I spent the evening telling him everything, showing him the journal, processing the complex emotions the meeting had stirred in me. Through it all, Eric listened with the unwavering support that had become my anchor in the storm of recent weeks. "What happens now?" he asked when I finally fell silent. "With your parents and Madison?" The question sobered me. In the emotional aftermath of meeting Caroline, I had briefly pushed thoughts of my adoptive family aside. But they remained an unresolved chapter in this unfolding story. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still so angry with them, especially my parents. The lies, the favoritism, the way they kept Caroline from me after Grandma died." "You have every right to be angry," Eric assured me. "That doesn't mean you have to make permanent decisions right now." I nodded, grateful for his perspective. "I need time to process everything, to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I want with them going forward." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone chimed with a text from Madison. "Hoping your meeting went well today. Here if you want to talk." I stared at the message, conflicted. Madison hadn't been responsible for the adoption deception, and her recent attempts at support seemed genuine. But she had been the unwitting beneficiary of our parents' unequal love for decades. "One step at a time," Eric suggested, seeing my hesitation. "Maybe start with Madison, she seems to be trying." After a moment's consideration, I replied simply, "It went well, still processing, we'll call soon." That night, as I began reading Caroline's journal, the hopes and fears of a terrified 19-year-old facing an impossible choice, I realized something profound. My story hadn't begun with Richard and Diana Hayes. It hadn't even begun with my birth. It had started here in these pages with a young woman's courage and sacrifice. I fell asleep with the journal beside me, dreaming not of the past but of possibilities I had never dared to imagine before. 2 weeks after meeting Caroline, I finally agreed to see Madison. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Burlington, far from our parents' neighborhood. She arrived first, waving nervously from a corner table when I walked in. "You look different," she observed as I sat across from her. "More, I don't know, settled somehow." Meeting Caroline changed things, I admitted. It helped me understand parts of myself I've always questioned. Madison nodded, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since. Everything. About our childhood. About Mom and Dad's behavior." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "You were right, Autumn. They treated us differently. Drastically differently. I just never let myself see it." Her acknowledgement, simple as it was, felt like validation of my entire life experience. "Why do you think you didn't notice?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Madison considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I think it was easier not to. I was comfortable in my role as the golden child. Questioning that would have meant questioning everything, their values, their character, my own accomplishments. And now I can't unsee it," she said quietly. "Every memory is being re-examined, every family dinner, every holiday. The way they would interrupt you but hang on my every word. The way they celebrated my smallest victories but barely acknowledged your major ones." She shook her head. It was wrong, Autumn, so deeply wrong. Her words unlocked something in me. Permission, perhaps, to fully own the injustice of my childhood, without questioning whether I was overreacting or being oversensitive. "Have you talked to them since?" That night, I asked, referring to my confrontation. Madison grimaced. "They're in crisis mode. Mom cries constantly. Dad alternates between anger and this weird stoic silence. They're desperate to talk to you, to explain, though I'm not sure what explanation could possibly justify 30 years of lies." "There isn't one," I said firmly. "But I might be ready to hear them try." Madison looked surprised. "Really?" After everything, I shrugged, surprising myself with the realization. I'm not saying I've forgiven them. I'm not even saying I want to rebuild a relationship. But there are still questions only they can answer. Like what? Like why they agreed to adopt me in the first place, if they weren't prepared to love me equally. Like why they kept the truth from me for so long. Like, I hesitated, voicing the question that had haunted me since discovering the letters. Like whether they ever truly thought of me as their daughter. Madison reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "For what it's worth, I always thought of you as my sister. Still do." The gesture touched me more than I expected. "I know. And despite everything, you are my sister, Madison. Biology doesn't change that." "So what happens now?" she asked. "I think I'm ready to talk to them," I said slowly. "Not alone, though." "Would you be there?" Madison's eyes widened. "You want me there, are you sure?" I nodded. "I think having you witness it might help keep them honest. Plus," I hesitated, vulnerability not coming easily after years of emotional self-defense. "I could use the support." "Of course," she agreed immediately. "Just tell me when." We arranged for a meeting at Madison's condo the following weekend. Neutral territory compared to our parents' house, but more private than a public setting for what promised to be an emotional confrontation. When I told Eric about my decision, he was supportive but concerned. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "There's no rush, Autumn." "I'm sure," I replied. "I need closure one way or another. To move forward with Caroline, with my own life, I need to address the past." The day of the meeting, I arrived at Madison's modern downtown condo, feeling surprisingly calm. Whatever happened today, I had already begun building a new understanding of myself that didn't depend on Richard and Diana Hayes's validation. Madison greeted me with a quick hug. "They're already here," she whispered. "In the living room. Dad's been checking his watch every 2 minutes." I took a deep breath and followed her into the spacious living area where my parents sat stiffly on a minimalist sofa. They both stood when I entered, my mother taking an instinctive step toward me before stopping herself. "Autumn," she said, her voice wavering. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." I nodded but didn't move to embrace her. "I have questions. I'm hoping for honest answers." Of course, my father said, his usual commanding presence diminished somehow. "Whatever you want to know." We all sat, Madison positioning herself beside me in a subtle show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by our parents. "Why did you agree to adopt me?" I began, deciding to start with the most fundamental question. My parents exchanged glances, a lifetime of silent communication passing between them. Finally, my mother spoke. "We wanted another child," she said simply. "After Madison, I had several miscarriages. The doctors eventually told us I couldn't carry another pregnancy to term. We were devastated." "So I was." "What the consolation prize?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "No," my mother protested. "You were a gift." When Eleanor told us about Caroline, about her situation, it seemed like fate. A young woman needing someone to love her baby, and us with so much love to give. The sentiment rang hollow against my lived experience. If you had so much love to give, why did Madison get so much more of it than I did? My father shifted uncomfortably. We didn't intend for things to be unbalanced, Autumn. It just happened that way. Things don't just happen, Dad, I countered. Consistent patterns of behavior over decades are choices. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. My mother stepped in, her voice pleading. Madison was our miracle baby after years of trying. We nearly lost her during childbirth. Maybe that created a special attachment. But we loved you too, Autumn. We always did. Just not equally, I stated flatly. Not enough to celebrate my accomplishments the way you celebrated hers. Not enough to remember my birthdays with the same enthusiasm. Not enough to make me feel like I truly belonged. Neither of them denied it, which was something of a victory in itself. Why did you never tell me I was adopted? I continued, pressing forward. Why keep it a secret for 29 years? We were going to tell you, my father insisted. When you were younger, we thought you wouldn't understand. Then as you got older, it never seemed like the right time. That's not good enough, Madison interjected suddenly, surprising all of us. 29 years without the right time, come on. My father's expression hardened. This is between us and Autumn Madison. No, I can't. Madison deserves to be part of this conversation. She was kept in the dark too. We were trying to protect both of you, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. We wanted you to feel like a real family. We were a real family, I replied. But families are built on trust and honesty, not secrets and lies. A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of my words sank in. My father was the first to break it. After Eleanor died, Caroline contacted us. He admitted, his voice tight. She wanted to meet you. I discouraged it. You had no right, I said quietly, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. That wasn't your decision to make. I was protecting our family, he insisted. You were 24, building your career, finding your way. I didn't want to disrupt your life with complications. You mean you didn't want to disrupt your narrative, I corrected. Your perfect family story, where I was your biological daughter, and everything was normal. He didn't deny it, which told me everything. I've met her now, I said, watching their reactions carefully. Caroline. We've talked several times. She's kind, intelligent, creative, and she would have been in my life years ago if you hadn't interfered. My mother paled. You've met her. What is she like? The question seemed genuine, tinged with curiosity rather than jealousy. She's like me, I answered simply, or rather, I'm like her. We have the same eyes, the same laugh, the same tendency to talk with our hands when we're excited about something. For the first time, I saw real regret cross my father's face. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone, he said softly. I see now that I was wrong. The admission, unexpected as it was, didn't magically heal 3 decades of emotional wounds. But it was something, an acknowledgement at least that mistakes had been made. Where do we go from here? My mother asked, her voice small. Can we still be a family, Autumn? I considered the question carefully. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm still processing everything, the lies, the favoritism, the lost years with Caroline. I need time and space to figure out what kind of relationship I want with you both going forward. We'll give you whatever you need, my mother promised quickly. Time-space therapy, whatever helps you heal. It's not that simple, I replied. This isn't something that can be fixed with time and therapy. This is about fundamentally re-evaluating what family means to me, who I want in my life, and on what terms. My father nodded slowly, seeming to truly hear me for perhaps the first time. We understand, he said, his voice uncharacteristically humble. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we hope someday you might give us a chance to do better. As the conversation drew to a close, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the family I had thought. I had anger at the deception, but also a tentative hope that perhaps with time and radical honesty, something healthier might be possible. Madison walked me to my car afterward, her expression thoughtful. That was intense, she observed. "How are you feeling?" Surprisingly. "Okay," I replied. Not healed, not reconciled, but clearer somehow. Like I've finally spoken my truth after holding it inside for a lifetime. She hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Autumn. And I'm so sorry for my part in all of this. For not seeing it, for not standing up for you sooner." "You're standing up for me now," I pointed out. "That matters." As I drove home, I realized something profound had shifted within me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defining myself by the Hayes family narrative. I was writing my own story. One that included Caroline, that made space for a new relationship with Madison, that left the door cautiously ajar for my parents while prioritizing my own emotional well-being. I called Eric as soon as I got home, needing to share the sense of liberation I felt. "It went better than expected," I told him. "Not perfect, but honest. Really honest for the first time." "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice warm. "This hasn't been easy, any of it." "No," I agreed. "But necessary. I feel like I can finally start moving forward, instead of being trapped in patterns that were established before I was even born." Later that evening, I emailed Caroline, updating her on the meeting with my parents. Her response came quickly. "I'm in awe of your courage, Autumn. Confronting the past is never easy, but it's often the only way to claim your future. Whatever you decide about your relationship with Richard and Diana, please know that I'm here, not to replace anyone, but to add to the tapestry of love and support in your life. I've missed 29 birthdays, but I'd very much like to be present for the 30th if you'll have me." Reading her words, I felt tears spring to my eyes, not tears of grief or anger this time, but of possibility. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time, I was the one choosing the direction. 6 months after discovering the truth about my adoption, my 30th birthday arrived on a perfect June day. Unlike previous birthdays marked by disappointment and unmet expectations, I faced this milestone with a sense of genuine anticipation. So much had changed in half a year. My relationship with Caroline had deepened into something precious and authentic. We spoke weekly, exchanging emails and texts between our conversations. She had invited me to Boston several times, showing me her gallery, introducing me to her friends, sharing pieces of her life with generous openness. Through Caroline, I had met my biological grandmother, a spirited woman in her 70s, who had initially rejected her pregnant daughter but had spent decades regretting that decision. Our first meeting had been tearful on both sides, decades of loss and regret, giving way to cautious hope. My relationship with my adoptive parents remained complicated but was slowly evolving. After our confrontation, they had entered family therapy both individually and as a couple. A step that surprised me with its sincerity. I maintained careful boundaries, agreeing to monthly dinners that were sometimes awkward but increasingly honest. The power dynamic had shifted fundamentally. I was no longer the insecure daughter desperate for approval, but an adult woman choosing the terms of our relationship. Madison and I had grown closer than I ever thought possible. Without the competition fostered by our parents' favoritism, we discovered a genuine friendship beneath our sisterhood. She had been my steadfast ally in family negotiations, and had developed her own relationship with Caroline, something that initially surprised me but ultimately made sense. We were all connected now, pieces of the same complex puzzle. For my 30th birthday, I had made an unprecedented decision to gather all these fractured pieces of my family together. Caroline and my biological grandmother would meet my adoptive parents for the first time. Madison would be there with her new boyfriend. Eric, now my fiancé, after a heartfelt proposal the previous month, would be by my side. I chose a private room at a lakeside restaurant in Burlington Neutral Territory for this unprecedented gathering. As I entered with Eric, I felt a momentary panic at the potential for disaster. What if my father reverted to his controlling persona? What if my mother broke down in tears? What if Caroline felt uncomfortable in the presence of the people who had raised her biological daughter? But as the evening unfolded, my fear gradually subsided. There were awkward moments, certainly. A stilted initial greeting between Caroline and my mother, a too firm handshake between my father and my biological grandmother. But there was also genuine effort on all sides, careful conversation, giving way to more relaxed interaction as the meal progressed. I watched in amazement as my mother and Caroline discovered a shared interest in Renaissance art, as my biological grandmother made Madison laugh with stories of Caroline's rebellious teenage years, as my father actually listened when others spoke instead of dominating the conversation. When dessert arrived, a beautiful cake that Eric had specially ordered, Caroline proposed a toast. "To Autumn," she said, raising her glass. "Who had the courage to uncover the truth and the wisdom to forge something new from it? Happy birthday, my daughter." "To Autumn," echoed my mother, her voice steady as she met Caroline's gaze with surprising grace. Our daughter. In that moment, surrounded by this imperfect, complicated, blended family of my own making, I felt something I had never truly experienced before, a sense of belonging that wasn't dependent on performance or perfection. I belonged simply because I was Autumn, because I existed, because each person in this room had chosen to be here to honor their connection to me, despite the complex history between us. As the evening drew to a close, I stepped outside onto the restaurant's deck overlooking Lake Champlain. The setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and pink, a fitting backdrop to this day of new beginnings. Eric joined me, slipping an arm around my waist. "Happy birthday," he murmured, kissing my temple. "How does it feel to be 30? I considered the question, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the water. "It feels like arrival," I said finally. "Like I've finally arrived at the person I was always meant to be." He smiled, understanding as he always did. "I'm so proud of you, Autumn. You've transformed something painful into something beautiful." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before returning to our unlikely gathering. This family I had lost and found and created all at once. I know my story isn't unique. Across the world, countless people struggle with family secrets, with feeling unseen, with the search for identity and belonging. If my experience has taught me anything, it's that truth, however painful, offers the only real path to healing. So if you're watching this and my story resonates with your own family drama, remember that you deserve to be seen, to be celebrated, to be loved for exactly who you are. Sometimes finding your place means reshaping your entire understanding of family. And that's okay. If you've enjoyed this journey with me, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about family karma, healing, and finding your own path. Drop a comment sharing any family revelations that changed your life. I read every single one. Thank you for being here with me today, and remember, the family you choose can be just as meaningful as the one you're born into. Until next time, this is Autumn Hayes, finally celebrating on my own terms.